those talks that were going on with managers still continued, but not to the same level of intensity. There was that protracted, prolonged period of will he stay, will he go?
The latest international break may have halted Premier League football, but the future of Erik ten Hag remains the hottest topic in England, with the Dutchman once more under the microscope. We're diving into his position at the club, signings, and the perils of VAR. That and more on the latest episode of the Theatre of Red. Happy Friday, one and all. How are you all doing? Did you miss me as much as I've missed each and every one of you? On today's show, I'm delighted to bring another giant of the football world to you. A commentator and writer for a variety of publications, from the World Football Index to the brilliant Breaking the Lines. I'm, of course, speaking about the one and only Mr. Callum McFadden. How is everything in your world, my friend? You doing good?
All good, Shaun. Delighted to be joining you. Big fan of what you do and the coverage you provide of Manchester United. And as I say, thank you for having me.
Oh, you're too kind. Very, very kind words. And you're more than welcome. Before we get started today, it is obviously broken in the last hour. And I just want to start by expressing our best for Nasser Mazraoui following the news that he's after undergoing minor surgery for heart palpitations. Regardless of whether it is a minor or a major issue, it's always going to be an undeniably worrying scenario for anybody. And everyone at the Theatre Red wishes him and his family the very, very best in recovery. Now, Callum, as we are halfway through yet another international break, which is halting any form of momentum or decline in this particular case for clubs across the continent, the Manchester United rumour mill continues to explode with a multitude of reports regarding the future of Erik ten Hag. Now, of course, the man himself has referred to all of this as external noise, as he did following the FA Cup final against Manchester City. And much like then, despite a highly publicised board meeting in London with Sir Jim Radcliffe, Joel Glazer, Dan Ashworth and the rest of the best-in-class team at Manchester United, at this time of speaking, we remain in the dark about the future of the Dutchman, and there's also ample speculation regarding every possible outcome. The team's form is undeniably poor, Callum. We've got the worst Premier League start in the Reds' history alongside a mishmash of underwhelming performances. That said, in the words of Sir Jim, we can count in weeks the length of time that this newly assembled team have been working together, with Ashworth also previously referencing a necessity to focus on medium to long-term results and to abolish this short-term thinking. As you and I speak today on October 10th, how do you view the managerial situation at Manchester United?
Being brutally honest, Shaun, I think it's untenable for Erik ten Hag, because not only is this season one of the worst starts in Premier League history, or is the worst start in Premier League history for Manchester United, when you look at the statistics, out of the top three worst starts, Erik ten Hag has 2 out of 3. The other one, of course, coming under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. And for me, that is worrying, in the sense that, this isn't something that has, come out of left field and has a real shock to everyone. The cup final against Manchester City was a fantastic day for everyone involved at Manchester United. There was a really strong performance on the pitch, albeit the team were set up to, play in a certain way that I don't think you can every week with the resources you get at United. So for me, I just think, yes, in the cup competitions, the Carabao Cup in the first season, then the FA Cup last season, yes, those are really good, but Manchester United, with the resource that's been put in, should not be a cup team. There should be progress in the league, that they're troubling the top teams in the country, whereas at the moment, far from that.
So before I elaborate on all of this and go into it in far greater detail, obviously referencing the cup successes and what he achieved, we'll say last season, particularly against Manchester City, there's numerous interpretations as to how the Ineos backroom team came to the decision to remain with Ten Hag and obviously extend his contract by that year. From your perspective, do you view it as a total fallout just from the result of the performance and the trophy collected against Manchester City, coupled with this overwhelming support from the fan base that came in the days and weeks after? Or do you feel it was that they were unable to achieve a desired target?
I think they wanted to move on from Erik Ten Hag. They wanted to bring their own man in, and the cup final and fan reaction swayed them. Now, obviously, I could be wrong with that, but I believe that the public nature of the way they were talking to Thomas Frank, Thomas Tuchel, there was also conversations had with Kieran McKenna as well. I just think that when you take all of that into consideration and the public nature of those, for me, they certainly wanted to move on from Erik Ten Hag, and I think with the greatest will in the world, they were expecting Manchester City to win that cup final, so they were getting the sort of wheels in motion for finding out who their man was going to be to take United forward. They were expecting the cup final to go Manchester City's way, and it would be a case of shaking Erik Ten Hag's hand on the Monday or maybe even that night and saying, "Thanks for what you've done here in the 2 seasons by winning the Carabao Cup and getting to this final, but we're going to move in a different direction." Whereas when the cup final was delivered, they obviously saw the fan reaction to that. And those talks that were going on with managers still continued, but not to the same level of intensity. There was that protracted, prolonged period of will he stay, will he go? And then it was eventually clarified that Erik Ten Hag would stay. And then a matter of weeks later, a new contract was signed, which Erik Ten Hag actually spoke about publicly on the Dutch broadcaster NOS, which sort of shed light on the situation more than was actually reported in the UK media at the time. So I think it's been a very messy situation, but as far as I can see it, they wanted to move on from Erik Ten Hag. They fully expected to move on from him. But with the cup final being delivered against that Manchester City team of Pep Guardiola that he's built and has had so many plaudits, I just think Ineos felt, if we get rid of him the way the Glazers and Woodward get rid of Van Gaal, that could be an unpalatable start to our reign with the fans. And now we find Manchester United are in this position a matter of 6 or 7 weeks into the season, and it probably could have been avoided for all parties, albeit it would have been an uncomfortable choice, I'm sure.
Yeah, they're valid points, and they've all been considered and they've been discussed many, many times. Often to my detriment, because maybe how I try to get my point across, it can be viewed or determined that I'm trying to ignore obvious faults and failures that are going on when that's not the case. From my upbringing through football, I always try to maybe apply a bit of pragmatism to every situation. I look at this, and it was something I was going to ask you about where you stood on this as well. When I look at Ten Hag and I look at the manager of Manchester United, I think it always stems back to this debate about backing a manager and a plan, and then essentially utilizing patience and time to cultivate a winning strategy in the background. When you look at it, on one hand, when you formulate this strategy and you build this fundamental structure in the background of a football club, it allows for the regular movement of managers like you would see with Barcelona, Real Madrid, and Bayern Munich, for example, because there's a sustained principle in how the football is played at this club, and it doesn't necessarily alter with a different vision of an individual coming into the hot seat. On the other hand, it can then breed an environment of success for one manager who could ultimately remain in the hot seat for several years with an extremely competent group above him. I bring this up because I look at this from this pragmatic view that if we were in a position now with, say, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, as I mentioned either last week or the week before, and if Ten Hag was still at Ajax, he would undoubtedly be top of the list of names to replace who was ever sat in that hot seat in Old Trafford. I mean, this is a man who has won trophies at Manchester United, as you said, but he won them in the most toxic of environments. And he's only really dipping his toe in the water of a new assembly. If you explore this and you expand it out, when he was at Ajax, he had a proper footballing structure, going to the Bernabeu and dismantling Real Madrid in their own backyard. I understand the necessity to change managers when required. But then at the same time, I also look at it from a viewpoint that an endless conveyor and a rinse and repeat system every 2 to 3 seasons, it's hideously tedious, particularly when you're working with the current manager and you've done that during the summer and adding further players to this squad. It only intensifies the issue that any other individual is going to receive when they step into the hot seat. Where do you stand on the debate about backing a manager and a plan, even going back to the points when you look at what Ferguson had to do when he arrived at the club in the late 80s and you had 3.5 seasons of abject finishes and supporter disgruntlement? Is it worthwhile in looking at this Ineos system that they're trying to develop, and that ultimately Ten Hag can prove successful within that structure?
I think, again, those are very good points. And I think, you certainly outline the fact rightly that Erik Ten Hag did not have a best-in-class structure around him, above him, sorry, when he arrived at Manchester United, without doubt. John Murtagh obviously was at the club for years, but I think he was performing a role that certainly he would not have been performing at any other major Premier League club, as has probably been shown since his departure. You also had Darren Fletcher, who was a named technical director, but he was also coaching. There wasn't really a clarity as to what he was doing. It certainly wasn't the sort of technical director, again, you would expect to see at another top club around Europe. So he certainly was not helped with the structure above him. The only thing that worries me, Shaun, with this situation at the moment is ultimately Ineos have come in at the time that they've arrived. They weren't the masters in play at hiring Erik Ten Hag. As you rightly say, though, given the results he had at Ajax, if there was a change and that version of Erik Ten Hag was available now, would he come into consideration? Most certainly. And you've outlined that well, to the point where, with a proper structure in and around him, he should hopefully be able to succeed. He's been backed in the transfer market again in the summer. And there's now obviously football people in place, Dan Ashworth, Jason Wilcox. Obviously, you've got a CEO as well, and Omar Barada, who's worked at the highest level at Manchester City as well. But my concern is, whenever you see an organisation start to change the backroom staff, I worry that you're on a hiding to nothing. Now, what I would say in defence of that would be, if Erik Ten Hag has pushed for those changes, I think that's a positive. But I just sense that the change in the backroom staff that were made, obviously with the new appointment of the goalkeeping coach that arrived from Burnley, you've also had, Ruud van Nistelrooy returning to the club, Rennie Haka, who was a manager at Go Ahead Eagles, coming in. There's also the manager who's arrived from Norway to become the set-piece coach as well. I worry that these appointments were not necessarily appointments that Ten Hag pushed for, in the sense that I think he was told he had to make changes, and he's made changes with people that he's maybe comfortable working with. But I don't necessarily think he was the one saying, I want to get rid of this one, that one, and that one, and replace them all in one go. And that, for me, is what makes me doubt that this can succeed, because if he's already given way in terms of his backroom staff being changed, obviously he's been backed in the market. I just don't see how long term or medium term this can be feasible, because I think ultimately there will be a case of, people's heads coming together, whether that's Erik Ten Hag and Dan Ashworth, or Jason Wilcox, or Omar Barada. I just think, those two in particular, Barada and Ashworth, made a very clear point when they spoke on the record after one of the first games of the season, when the Liverpool game, I believe, when they said, we were not involved in the decision for the manager to stay and sign that new contract. And I found that quite telling, to the point that, if you're Erik Ten Hag, hearing that would have made me worry and made me shudder. And that's ultimately is what I think, will be his downfall. I think it's not a case of, if he will leave. I think it's a case of when. If he's backed now, which again, is it terribly, there's that echo of silence that there was in the summer when United were speaking to other candidates. While that silence is there, there's no definitive, he's our man, and no matter what, we're backing him. I think you're going to find that the next international break, there'll be another chatter like this, or all it's going to take now is one more defeat, one more abject performance, even if it ended in a draw, and this chatter's going to get intensified time and time again. And I just think there's going to come a breaking point. And the reason I thought a change would be made now is because the international break was here, and obviously they had an idea. They wanted Thomas Tuchel in the summer. He was one of the names that they wanted. They made an offer to Thomas Tuchel. It was reported of around €8 million a year to manage Manchester United. Thomas Tuchel obviously was earning more at Bayern Munich, obviously felt that he would command a higher salary to manage Manchester United, and that any coach would, given the stature of the club. So that's what made me think, if they want Thomas Tuchel, now's the time that they can go out and absolutely get him. The fact they've not, again, suggests there's a bit of limbo But I see both sides of the argument. As I say, I can see your argument that with the structure in place, he should be able to succeed because you don't become a bad coach or a bad manager overnight. But as I say, my worry on the other hand, playing devil's advocate, is I just fear that obviously he's not the manager that this new group of people in place wanted. And ultimately, I think that'll be his downfall sooner rather than later.
You always have this air of unknown when new individuals enter into a scenario, that the very first focal point that's going to come up in football is he's not their manager. The other thing that I would say is regarding Barada and Ashworth's comments prior to Liverpool. I know they were released after Liverpool, and ultimately it was terrible timing given the result and the performance. But I do think it is worthwhile considering the comments regarding the contractual status and whether or not they were there. Obviously, they would have put themselves in a pretty difficult position had they to come out and said that they were involved in that, because ultimately they weren't categorically cleared to come in and start working for the club at that stage. So I do think they probably had a little bit of something behind the scenes that'll never be formulated. But it is also worthwhile mentioning that Barada said that they think he's an excellent coach and they're very much behind him, and they do think he's the right man to lead them forward. Moving on from Ten Hag just ever so slightly and focusing on the man you mentioned in Thomas Tuchel. He's one of two men that were obviously heavily linked to replacing him, the other one being Gareth Southgate. Now, Southgate has effectively ruled himself out, thankfully, by declaring he will not take a coaching role for the next year. But Tuchel is an interesting one because he is obviously a man that did hold those discussions with hierarchy during that drawn-out end-of-season review with Ineos. He's a manager that offers undeniable pedigree. He offers silverware and results. But at the same time, he also supplies aggravation and a collection of disputes with various board members in several clubs. Furthermore, you have to look at it, and even though he's got a plethora of high-profile clubs in his CV, he only gave 2 seasons in Dortmund, 2.5 in Paris, 18 months in Chelsea, a little over a season in Bayern Munich. That in itself is incredibly telling. And we know that there's no smoke without fire when people start mentioning Thomas Tuchel to Manchester United. Obviously, that's there. You and I both know the conversations were held during the summer. But also, given that you were a man similar to myself and indulging in the European game, how would you view the potential pairing of Thomas Tuchel and Manchester United under this hierarchy?
I think you've summed Tuchel up very well there, Shaun, in the sense that, he had a real period of stability when he was at Mainz. Really good job that he did there. Replacing Jurgen Klopp at any job, is going to be difficult. That eventually, obviously, goes on to with Dortmund. But, with Mainz, there was a real period of stability there. He built himself up. But as you rightly pointed out, Dortmund, Paris Saint-Germain, Chelsea and Bayern Munich, none of them lasted more than 3 seasons, which would be a concern given that the Ineos hierarchy have talked about wanting an aligned vision, an aligned style of play, clear principles that transfer through the club in terms of the type of players and characters that are recruited. And you would have to think that any potential new manager and coaching staff would have to, buy into that. In terms of Tuchel, I just personally don't see any way that Thomas Tuchel comes in at United and isn't the sort of top dog, if you would like. I think he's the sort of coach that will point to the fact that he's won the Champions League in recent times. He's won league titles around Europe, and although he's not been at clubs for an awful long period of time, as we've talked about, I think he will be saying, with my CV, I'm coming in, I'm happy to work with you on recruitment and work together on targets, but I'm the main man in charge here. And I actually question whether that would be the right sort of a medium to long term appointment for Ineos. An appointment that I think Ineos would be interested in would potentially be that of Thomas Frank at Brentford. He's shown that he can achieve great things on a small budget. Obviously, the budget United will be much bigger than he's working with at Brentford. But I think in terms of fitting into the structure of Ineos, I think that's the sort of coach that they might be tempted to bring in, who would happily work in unison with the likes of Ashworth and Wilcox, and there'd be a real aligned vision there. But then again, the devil's advocate aspect of that is, can't you mould Ten Hag into that, or can't Ten Hag be that sort of person going forward? And maybe you trusted him in the market this summer with more players that he's worked with before or he knows of, because it's your first summer in charge and you're trying to sort of get through that first window and show the manager that you're backing him. But to go back to the original question about Thomas Tuchel, as I say, I think it would certainly be the sort of appointment that would attract a lot of excitement from elements of the Manchester United fan base, because even though he's been at places for a short period of time, he has had success in terms of winning domestic titles, winning the Champions League, of course, at Chelsea, against Manchester City of all teams as well. So there would be an element of, this is a man who has shown that on the highest stage of football possible, he can compete and defeat Pep Guardiola and Manchester City, and people might get carried away with that narrative. Whereas the reality is, this United team, as we both know, is going to need a lot of work in the coming 18 months ahead, at the very least, because there are still aspects of the team that need to be addressed. As great as Johnny Evans was against Aston Villa, Manchester United should not need to be relying on the likes of a Johnny Evans at this stage of his career, with all due respect, even though I think he's a phenomenal professional and he's had a phenomenal career. I think that just sums up where United are at the moment. And if Tuchel was to be parachuted into this, would he be able to cope with the sort of madness that's went on so far this season in terms of the results and performances? Or would he be the sort of coach that would benefit from a full pre-season? Because as you saw when he went in at Bayern Munich, people expected it to be a case of, right, he's won the Champions League at Chelsea, he'll go in at Bayern, he'll take them to the next level, he's a German coach, he knows the German league, he's going to go in there and he could be there for, say, 5 or 6 years, and they could potentially be one of the teams that's in the running to win the Champions League every other season. It didn't work out like that. Obviously they got over the line thanks to Dortmund not getting over the line, with Terzic in the first season, when he wins the league at Bayern, where Terzic leaves 3 of his main players on the bench in their crunch game to potentially win the title, and then brings them on to chase it, and it's too late. And then we all know how last season went in Germany with Bayer Leverkusen being the incredible force that they were. So, as I say, for me, I think Tuchel's certainly a big enough name to handle the sort of media spotlight and attention that comes with Manchester United. He clearly is a confident man who backs himself. You only have to listen to him speak to the media to know how much he backs himself and believes in himself. But at the same time, is it the right fit for the new structure that's in place? That I wouldn't be too sure of. That's why the likes of Thomas Frank or Southgate and others who were linked more of a head coach rather than a real manager per se would potentially fit into that system a little bit more.
I think it all boils back to what I was saying previously about the baby steps that are being taken, and that when Sir Jim says you can count in weeks the amount of time that this backroom team has been there, we only have to go back, what is it now, 5-6 months to when he spoke with Bloomberg, and he said that as much as supporters are going to want immediate success, it could take up to 3 summer windows to get the team and get the environment and everything sculpted in the way that they need Manchester United to be in moving forward. Maybe in that particular scenario, 3 seasons down the line where you've had this structure working in unison to develop one continuous ethos between academy and first team, with some calculated acquisitions coming in and some players leaving the first team, then you have the structure that I was referencing that's similar to your Real Madrid, your Barca, your Bayern, where the likes of Thomas Tuchel could come in. Maybe he could give 2.5 seasons. He could win a Champions League. He could leave and another manager could come in and they could adopt the framework that has been created by Ineos to allow this football club to persevere. That's how I look at it. I think if you brought him in right now, when there's so much instability in the backroom and we're still trying to get over the fact that you've had close to 2 decades of mismanagement from the Glazers, I think Thomas Tuchel is a recipe for disaster. He's like a hand grenade inside in that environment, but maybe I'm wrong. One person that isn't wrong, in his own opinion, is Paul Merson, because he's had his say in it all on Thursday morning, and he maintains in his stance that Erik ten Hag is staying. And the main focus of what he looked to question is what you've drawn reference to a couple of times, and that was the recruitment team, the players and the policy and recruitment in the club. When you consider high-profile acquisitions, we'll say like Anthony last season struggling to click, and then you have the Jekyll and Hyde responses across social media and through the media to the likes of Joshua Zirkzee in present day with the lack of goals that we're having. Merson has suggested that the likes of Gary Neville or Rio Ferdinand could answer the issues and be a change of future recruitment inside the club. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that. But given with what we have seen during Ineos' first summer window, with Lenny Yoro, Matthias de Ligt, Nasser Mazraoui, Manuel Ugarte and Zirkzee arriving, how do you rate that as an overall window for the club while they've also been focusing on the academy, Callum?
I think in terms of Lenny Yoro, I thought that was the sort of signing that Manchester United would always have looked to make. Obviously, going back to Ferguson, obviously Ronaldo coming in from Sporting at a young age, Wayne Rooney being the sort of up and coming player in the Premier League that lots of teams wanted. You go and get him, and there was a lot of hype and attention around Lenny Yoro. And I think when you look at that, there was interest from, as I say, from Madrid and others. United went in and they got the player and they gave him a long term contract, and they certainly believe in him. Now, the fact that he obviously broke down with an injury, hasn't helped matters, and obviously it will remain to be seen how he then settles in when he plays catch up with his fitness. But I thought that signing was really positive. In terms of the other signings, Xerxes, to be fair to him, had a really good season with Bologna. Um, People will obviously point out and say, well, Bologna, going from Bologna to Manchester United is a big jump, which yes, it is, but at the same time, how many times have United been criticised in the past for chasing the so-called big name, the Casemiro, the Falcao, the Di Maria, who are maybe more interested in coming to United for, maybe financial rewards, let's be brutally honest, rather than obviously wanting to join the club and seeing it as a step in their career where they're delighted to be there and ready to go. So, as I say, I don't think that signing necessarily, should be getting the complete negativity that it is, because he's certainly a player who has shown that he can be impressive in a league in Serie A that is well respected. The Mazraoui and Delict ones are interesting. I'm always very sceptical when a club like Bayern Munich or Real Madrid is willing to let players go or actively wants a player to go, because those clubs tend to only let a player go because they have no choice and it's freedom of contract, or because they're on the way down. And that, for me, is the only worry. I know Erik ten Hag's worked with them before, but I would argue that the argument we had about Thomas Tuchel in terms of his managerial career is basically Matthias de Ligt is the playing equivalent of that. He's been at many big clubs. He's got an incredible CV, but has he really made a massive impact at any of those clubs other than Ajax? At Juventus, he was in the team, he was out the team. Bayern Munich was the same. Even with the Dutch national team, it's went that way as well. So for me, yes, the CV looks absolutely incredibly impressive, but when you actually hone in on it, there are cracks there that do make you worry. Mazraoui, for the fee that he commanded, I think it was around 15 to 18 million pounds. I think that one is a safe bet in the sense that if it doesn't come off, then you've not spent, an astronomical amount of money, say 50, 60 million pounds on a fullback who you're going to be stuck with for 5, 6 years and struggle to move on. I think the fact that you've not paid a king's ransom for him means that if it didn't work out, you could potentially move him on and cut your losses without it doing too much damage. The Agarte signing, I think, is the sort of signing that, again, you wouldn't be surprised that the likes of Ineos would want to make. He was very impressive at Sporting Lisbon. Paris Saint-Germain's not quite worked out, not fully involved in the way Luis Enrique wants to play. The likes of Duncan Castles, though, have reported that Luis Campos, the director of football at Paris Saint-Germain, wanted to keep Agarte, so it shows that he's certainly rated within the structure of the club, maybe not by his manager. So for me, it was certainly a mixed bag, in the sense that I could see the reasoning with Yoro, could see the reasoning with Xerxes, Agarte to an extent as well. As I say, the alarm bells for me probably more around Mazraoui and De Ligt, because yes, he's worked with them before, but I'll come back to it again. How often do Bayern Munich and Real Madrid actively let a player leave or are happy to let a player leave, and they go on to do bigger and better things? Not very often. Tony Kroos obviously is a different example. He left through essentially freedom of contract, to get his way to Real Madrid from Bayern, and he went on to have a great career. But you very rarely see these clubs happily let a player go who goes on to flourish elsewhere. So if I was to grade the window out of 10, I think I would probably say 6, in the sense that I think it's been better than the way the windows have been under the Glazers for a long time, but there's still a lot left to be desired, in my opinion.
I hold the forward line quite strongly, and particularly that with Xerxes, because obviously you and I both engage with breaking the lines. And I did a massive feature piece on Bologna about a year and a half ago, looking at Thiago Motta and doing a large focus on Xerxes and how he fit into that system. It was quite clear for me ever before he signed, because of the work that I had done, the role that he played, and sort of how pivotal he was going to be in terms of bringing his wing players, bringing his marauding midfielders into the game, and that his essential output on that Manchester United side was going to be aiming towards improving the output of the likes of Marcus Rashford, Alejandro Garnacho, Amad Diallo, Bruno Fernandes. And we've seen with 17 big chances missed already in the Premier League that opportunities are being created, they're just not being put away. Something I want to ask you, because I've never actually discussed it with you before. I'm a massive, massive admirer of Rasmus Højlund, of the player profile that he is and the potential that he has, especially given how well he responded to adversity in starting his career at Old Trafford. He finished so strong from December onward, and he really looks like a forward that you could build your attacking line around. I know he's young, and I know he's got his critics, but given the nature of his, we'll say, his chance conversion and his clinical nature in front of the goal, do you rate Rasmus Højlund as a man who can lead the line for Manchester United moving forward?
I'll be honest, I do rate Rasmus Højlund. The only thing I would say is I feel for him in the sense that there's not a more experienced striker there that Rasmus Højlund can learn from, in the sense that, he'd maybe be starting maybe 40% of the games in the first season, and then gradually he'd be ready to sort of overtake that more experienced striker as time goes on. I think he's unfortunate, as I say, just through a product of time when he's arrived at the club that you're the main man, you're going to be the number 9, on you go and hit the ground running. It was always going to be a big ask, but I would echo what you've said, Shaun, in the sense that he's certainly a player with lots of potential. Yes, he had a little bit of a tricky start, let's be honest, but he's certainly bounced back really well. He's got really good energy, which I think is crucial in the Premier League, especially away from home at certain times where you just have to do everything that you can to get in behind and be a nuisance against teams for, the 90 minutes, in the sense that you might get very little chances, but by running non-stop and applying as much pressure as possible, you might force a mistake from them. So for me, I certainly think he's got the potential to lead the line for Manchester United. I certainly think there's a player in there that can give benefit to Manchester United for the next 5, 6, 7 seasons if he plays his cards right and he stays at the club and things continue to progress for him. But as I say, the only thing I feel sorry for him is the fact that there isn't that more experienced striker that he can maybe lean on and learn from. But then again, I suppose the argument is you've now got Ruud van Nistelrooy on the staff, and is there a better person to learn from than a striker of his class and quality that he showed in England, he showed in Spain, he showed in the Netherlands, and hopefully that can sort of benefit Rasmus and rub off on him, because he certainly, as we've both said, a player with great potential who I think can be a real success story for United as long as he's utilised properly with the right personnel around him.
One point that you made about how it's easy to feel, we'll say, sorry for him because he's coming into the football club without the ample support from a veteran player, and at such a young age and relative inexperience is thrust in and is you are our number 9. If ever there was a sign of the deficiency of the backroom team that was leading that football club, that alone is the epitome of just how poor the decision making was. One final talking point, because it continues to rear its head in recent days. It's been VAR. VAR decisions and overturns, and particularly that of Bruno Fernandes, with Howard Webb having his say. We saw dismissals in consecutive outings for Fernandes, both contentious and both seemingly redundant when considering the technology and the capacity of the video assistant. I've recently wrote about the failings of VAR, lying in the user, not the system, and the growing acceptance that these issues are occurring because each individual has a different interpretation of ever-changing rules within football. Given your experience that you have on the continent in looking at various different leagues and seeing the application of various different refereeing and officiating measures, and then you come to the Premier League and you look at the complete and utter hames that is VAR on a weekly basis, 8 years after its trial inception during that friendly fixture between those Eredivisie clubs. What is your take on VAR in 2024?
I think, as you again have alluded to, I think that the system should be in place and that we should be at a point now with the implementation being several seasons down the line that, it should be running much more smoothly than it is. The thing that frustrates me, especially when the audio that was released of the Fernandes red against Tottenham is, there's one official who seems absolutely set on that it's a red card. There's some uncertainty from others, but the referee isn't then told to come to the screen and make that decision for himself. And for me, anything that is contentious, I think the referee should always be encouraged to go to the monitor to make that final decision for themselves. Nothing frustrates me more as a fan of football or being in the press box when a referee is told what decision to make. Whether there's technology or not, I think ultimately anything contentious that can be rewatched by the referee very quickly and a decision made should be. I love the use of automated offsides and things like the Champions League. I know the Premier League's going to adopt that further down the line. I think that'll be fantastic because the drawing of lines and the time that takes, very frustrating. But I understand without automated offsides being in place, that's the reality of it. Okay, I can understand that. But as I say, for me, we should be at a stage where it's smooth and anything contentious, the referee goes to the screen, looks at, makes the final decision, and anything that's not really contentious and can just be given through to the referee through his earpiece, then fair enough, do that and improve the speed of the game. I'd be in favour of that. The other thing I would add in with VAR, which absolutely drives me crazy, is why on earth can't second yellow cards be looked at by VAR? And the reason I say that passionately is because a red card can change a game, but not just a straight red card. A second yellow that is unjust can change the game because the player ultimately is still going off, whether it's a straight red or a second yellow. So for me, that's something I would love to see VAR be able to look at, because so many times you hear it on Match of the Day, or if you're watching a game live yourself, and you see the second yellow and then the red card coming out, and you think that's a mistake, but they cannot go back and look at it. And with the technology being there, I just don't understand how, we don't really look at those, can be a reasonable or logical explanation in 2024. So, as I say, the second yellow cards for me needs to be something that VAR can look at. And as I say, my strong opinion on it is make it as fast as possible for the less contentious issues. But ultimately, anything contentious, let the referee look at and make the decision. Give the referee that final call.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you have a referee, you have an assistant, and you have your video team. The role of VAR, it's to aid with clear and obvious errors or serious missed incidents. And I mean, ultimately, you want all of that to enable the referee on the day to achieve a decision effectively. Unfortunately, as we've seen on a weekly basis, almost a plethora of inconsistencies has ravaged the reputation of VAR, and a lot of people don't really understand when to channel their frustration. Unfortunately, when we have a free opinion between a variety of individuals and every single individual wanting to stand out above the rest, I fear it's only going to get worse on a weekly basis, Callum. But on that, it was an absolute pleasure to chat with you today, sir. What have you got coming up in your world over the coming weeks?
In the coming weeks, I will be working ahead with some more interviews for World Football Index. I've also got my own website now where I'll be putting up some articles too. So keep an eye out on social media. You can follow me at Callum7McFadden on X. And as I say, just looking to cover football across all levels and, follow the madness that occurs, whether that be in continental football, with football in the UK and Ireland, and of course, Manchester United.
And if people want to see the website, Callum, where can they go?
So the website is cmfootballwriting.com, and on there are a variety of opinion pieces, interviews with players and managers, and I'm trying to get some sort of guest writers that have expertise in certain fields. So I had an expert, Kevin McCluskey, who covers football in Hungary, and he was looking at some of the the little aspects that are unique to Hungarian football and how their teams and players are performing in European competition. And I'm trying to do that for a lot of the major European leagues as well.
I think anybody who's listening who has any passion or desire for football, get in contact with Callum. Great guy to talk to, an absolute fountain of knowledge walking. He's available and he's happy to speak with you all. As always, you can reach me at Shaun Connolly 85 on Twitter, and you can connect with the site and the pod across every single social platform at theatre_of_red. And lastly, this podcast is nothing without each and every one of you. If you're still here and you haven't already done so, please subscribe and you might leave a review. I know I say it every single week, but your support really does mean the world. Enjoy your weekends and we'll catch up before Brentford next week. Ta-ra all.